Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's so great to speak with you.
The first thing I wanted to talk to you about is obviously the main theme of the book being mind mastery and the components being awareness, the mind, focus, and willpower. I want to dive into some of those themes today. Maybe not in that particular order. We'll chop and change as we go along. But the first thing I wanted to talk to you about was focus and this idea of the disease of distraction and how important it is to ask ourselves what we focus on, what meaning we assign to it, and what actions we take. What can you tell us about the disease of distraction?
It's a great question, and what a great way to start. So, if we look at life through the lens of kind of what we do on a daily basis, there are the last I checked, there are 3.5 billion smartphones on the planet. So roughly half the planet has at least one smartphone. The other statistic that comes to mind is on average, we check our smartphones 85 times a day. So when we talk about focus, how can you really be focused if you're looking at something 85 times a day? But Lewis, the interesting thing that I've come to realize is there is a method to the madness. And part of what we're doing, it comes down to, and this is, I'm going to answer your question in more detail, but think about why we invented the internet. What is the internet? The internet is, and granted, it's a lot of things to a lot of people, but the internet is where we're creating basically a place where we can put our memories. So that's what Facebook is. In some cases, that's what Instagram is. But it's also Wikipedia, right? It's also this dumping ground for our history. Because why do we want our history to be something that we have up here if we can just access it somewhere else? And so I used to think that our predilection and our desire to kind of be distracted was a shortcoming, but I realized there's a purpose behind it. And that purpose is we're creating our history online so we don't have to keep it inside ourselves anymore. And so that's the price we pay, is distraction. We're paying for distraction now so that we can build this sort of living history online that's both personal to us, like it is on Facebook, but it's also, if I need to go out and search what Caligula did 2,000 years ago as the third, emperor from the Julio-Augustan line, or Julio-Caesarian line, I can go look at that. And I don't have to have that occupying my brain. So that's part of it, but it's understanding the purpose of distraction. And in our lives today, I think distraction is a stepping stone into building our memory and kind of building that part of our mind online.
What tools do you use to become so indestructible then?
You have to, I just read last weekend, it just came out, this book called Limitless by Jim Quick. I read it over the weekend, 320 pages. I was kind of blown away, but you have to you kind of have to scrape off the layers of who you think you are. And some of that, my background, I was in the military. The military does a great job of giving you an identity. And part of that's because they want you to share that same identity with everyone you work with. That's what makes a military a very effective force. So in order to become undistractable, you have to kind of just burn away all the things you think you are or who you're supposed to be until you really get to the essence of who you are. And once you get to the essence of who you are, then you've come to your own truth. And when you've gotten to your own truth, undistractability almost becomes self-evident, because you realize, well, this is who I am. And so, I'm operating from this place of my truth. And then it's, where do I direct my awareness? Where do I direct my attention to help people get to their truth?
Mm. We've spoken to a few military and special forces guys on this podcast, and they all talk about identity and how when they come out of the force, they lose that sense of identity because up to that point in their life, that's all they ever were. That was built into who they are, and they said that their life started taking a turn afterwards. They started, creeping into bad habits, going down a wrong path, and it wasn't until they found a sense of meaning again that they could truly focus in on something. Would you say that finding meaning in what you do is extremely important when it comes to focus?
Absolutely. Because meaning is, so my first book was about finding your purpose in life. And that's basically meaning. And we all want to know what life means. And the reality is there is a meaning to life. And it's, you have a purpose to life, but life has a purpose. Life, if we think of life as you and I are both living. I look outside, there's trees, they're living. But we never really think of life as an entity unto itself. We don't think of life as its own being, in other words. Why can't life be its own being? Like, who's to say that life can't be its own being? So if life has a meaning, then life has a purpose. And that brings me back to love. And if love has a meaning and love has a purpose, then it's really to create perfect love, which creates a perfect life. And so you finding your purpose, you finding your meaning is ultimately going to lead you back to love and lead you back to life. And then you plug into what's my purpose in the purpose of life, or what's my purpose in the purpose of love. And when you connect into that, then you're at your truth. So distraction isn't a problem because you know where you're coming from and this is it. And I think the guys that you mentioned, or women for that matter, coming out of the military, it's hard. It's hard to take away an identity that has formed you for 4 or 10 or 15 years and create your own identity. And so you get into some of these bad habits because you're trying to replace the feeling or the residual feeling you felt from being in the military with something else, and it doesn't work. And so it's only until you strip all that away and get to meaning that you start to advance your life in a positive way.
One of the quotes that stuck out to me in The Lighthouse Keeper was, wherever he directed his focus, his energy followed. Is that a case of the stories we tell ourselves? Are they shaping our reality?
They sure are. And it's so funny you bring that up because I just yesterday, I finished my third book, which I'm going to read live on Instagram on May 17th. But the stories, it's interesting, Lewis, because this story, my third book, is about the story of existence. And when you understand what the story of existence is, you understood we've told ourselves these stories over and over again. And that really is the story that we've told ourselves so many times is the story of the hero's journey. And if you look at movies, you can say, what's the stories of the first 10 years of Marvel Comics or the Marvel Studios? It's the hero's journey for Tony Stark. It starts with Iron Man. It ends with him saying, I am Iron Man. Thanos goes away. He sacrificed him. That's the hero's journey. Lord of the Rings, hero's journey. Star Wars, hero's journey. So many times we've told this story over and over again. Now it's time for another story.
Where you direct your focus, your energy follows. How deep does that go then? Is that a case of, if you're concerning yourself with maybe what the possible negative outcomes are, even if they're not plausible, that you're bringing them closer to reality just by doing that?
That's perfectly said, Lewis. Every time you look at a negative facet of life, even if you have metrics, if you're in a business and you have metrics that are measuring negative things, you're going to find negative things because you're looking for them. So you have to train your mind to focus on the positive, because anytime you accept a negative thought into your mind and you bring that into your focus and your awareness, you're creating this sense where you have the potential for negative things to happen, because you're entertaining that, because that's where your focus is.
Yeah. So one of the struggles that I picked up on in the book was is controlling your thoughts, or becoming a master of your thoughts. And the main struggle that the main character had was how to stop the mind wandering. What are some of the tactics we can use to stop our mind wandering?
A part of it really becomes to just being present with your awareness. And it takes a little bit of energy initially, because our mind is predisposed to wander, because that's kind of how we set up in the analogy in the Lighthouse Keeper is, if your mind is an ocean where all your thoughts and memories and recollections are, and everyone you've ever met's there, and your lighthouse is an awareness, most people at their lighthouse go round and round, or it's going around in preconceived patterns day after day, right? And I hope you can't hear, there's background noise. Someone just came home from the grocery store, so that's one of the perks of working from home. But if you start to focus through the practice of meditation, through the practice of just being aware and being present where your focus and awareness is gone, then you can slowly start to pull it in. And all of these things are interrelated, because as you pull your focus in and as you start to master your mind, you want to direct it. And so where do you direct it? Well, you direct it to, what's my purpose? What's my meaning? And you can't get into really understanding what your purpose is until you start to understand the purpose of life and the purpose of love. And as those things come together, then it's almost like you're plugging into life as an entity, or love as an entity. And you're like, oh, this is my connection to source. This is my connection. Therefore, this is my purpose. And then it's this beautiful moment where you're able to turn around to the world and say, this is who I am, and this is what I'm here to do.
There was a process I picked up in the book, and it was, we can learn to control where we direct our awareness through the 3 levels of knowledge, which are 1, cognitive knowledge, 2, emotional knowledge, and 3, physical knowledge. Could you talk a little bit about that process and what each level means?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is I have to give a shout out to Tony Robbins. This is something that he taught me 3 years ago when I went to one of his incredible sessions. But cognitive knowledge is where you understand something. So if you tell me, William the Conqueror came to England and this date, and he basically brought about the empire of the United Kingdom or England or whatever. I know that. I know that because you just shared it with me. Okay, I got that. Can I, in any real sense, articulate, unless I've studied William the Conqueror, can I go into detail about his exploits, how he brought castles to the UK? I'm not completely familiar, but I have that understanding because you just shared it with me. So that's cognitive knowledge, knowing something, but maybe I can't necessarily articulate it or really speak to it. The next level of knowledge then is where if I put my hand near a fire and someone says, oh, don't put your hand in the fire, you're going to get burnt, and I've never experienced fire before, I stick my hand in the fire, I get burnt. Now I've learned a lesson. Don't stick your hand in the fire, because I have the experience now. The final level, where it's this physiological, it's visceral, is where I don't need a book. I don't need the experience, because it's a part of me, and I can communicate out, this is a part of me, this is who I am. And that's when you really have knowledge inside you, is because you've got this, and it's something you can speak to without having to research it, without having to, because you've experienced already so much of it that it's become this part of you. And so you're actually communicating it because it comes from you.
How long a process is it to go from that level 1 of knowledge to that level 3, and how do we get there?
That's a great question. It depends on what it is you're after, because that's going to drive your passion. And if it's, I want to know, again, if I go back to William the Conqueror, fascinating story. I actually started writing a book about that. And so I got into it, but it was a process. my last book, the book I've just finished actually took me about 2 months to write. But I went through, and it's a strange book, but it took me about 5 drafts to make it. And what I realized in the writing of the book was I was teaching myself as I wrote everything I needed to know in order to write the next version. And it was the most exciting thing that has ever happened to me in my life, because it was like the book was being written and I was just the one scribing it. But I wasn't, like, the words that were coming out, I was learning them as they happened. And so it comes back to the passion of what we want. The things that I've learned in 2 months of writing this book, I mean, I don't know how long it would take someone to learn those things over the course of a lifetime if they don't have the passion, because I understand existence now. I think I'm close to understanding how we travel through time, which is a crazy concept, but there's all these things that come with it. And so it depends on what you're passionate about, because your passion is going to pull you. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand. If you are having to push yourself, that's that external struggle. The internal, and that's the hero's journey that we talked about earlier. The heroine's journey is an internal journey. So when you think of wisdom, the hero's journey is about freedom. When you think of wisdom, that's the heroine's journey, and that's an internal one. So when you connect with that internal view of what you're really after, then the pull pulls you. So, and like I said, this book wrote me. I don't feel like I necessarily wrote the book. I was just the scribe. But that's what had me up 2 nights ago till 2 o'clock in the morning, because I wanted to finish the book, and even then I wasn't going to finish it. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully that gives you some perspective.
Another thing that I picked up on was this idea of when we revisit memories or actions, we create patterns. Those patterns in turn become habits, which then in turn become our lives. Is there a case of, so if there's a bad memory or a bad action that can create a bad habit down the road, is there a case of not revisiting that memory, or is it a case of how we revisit that memory?
I love that question, Lewis. What a brilliant question. Again, we have to be careful. So our history is there to learn from. And notice it's his story, the hero's journey. I think we're getting to the point in time where his story is done and her story is going to take center stage. But when you visit a memory, I think that the best reason we should visit a memory is to learn from it, because we want to understand, why do I keep coming back to this? What am I not taking away from this that I should be taking away from it? Because if we live there and we live in the emotion of it, what are we really doing? We're living in the past. And the only life we've experienced is our past. So if we make decisions based on what we know, we're always going to repeat the things we've done in the past, because that's all we know. So until we say, okay, I keep coming back to this memory because I was supposed to learn this. When you get to that moment, it's this beautiful revelation, because in some ways you're freeing the memory, but the memory is also freeing you. And when that happens, you're bringing more of yourself into the present, which means it's easier to control your mind, because your awareness is now in the present and you're not focusing on something in the past that you've gone back to for weeks or months or days or years.
That brings up something I read in the book that I didn't quite understand at the time, but I feel like I'm gaining more of an understanding of it now. And that is, the quote is, if you view things as happening to us, we might always feel like a victim. If you view them as happening for us, we might take away some kind of lesson from them. Is that what you meant there?
That's exactly it. And we all have, when we think that life is happening to us, then it's this odd or unfortunate or this cataclysmic series of events that we're just being inundated with. Mm-hmm. And if you say life is happening for us, what's the logical conclusion that leads you to? Life is planned. there are no coincidences. Like, life is planned. Life has a purpose. Life itself as an entity has a purpose. Love has a purpose. And so when you realize things are planned, you get to the space where you're like, well, if things are planned, then what am I worrying about? Why am I spending all this time worrying? Like, why can't I just free myself up from whatever has held me back, start to live in the present, and then start to paint a future of the future that I really want? And remind me before we finish, I want to share with you something really interesting that I learned this week, because it's applicable to the UK, but I found it fascinating that this is supposedly happening this year. So,
okay. Another thing that cropped up around the same time in the book is this idea of not wanting and wanting are the same thing where energy and awareness are concerned. What is it that you meant by that exactly?
When you want something, it's because you lack it. That's what want is. I want a relationship. I lack a relationship. So the more I want, the more I'm actually pushing it away, because I'm calling to mind how much I lack this thing. And so I'm creating space between the thing that I actually want to bring closer to me. Not wanting is, you know what? This is something I want, would be beautiful in my life. And I don't say I want, but this would be so great. And if I picture it and I start to give it life, whatever it is, if it's an idea, if it's a business, if it's another person, but I start to breathe this person to life, then I'm not doing it from a place of lack. I'm doing it from a place of gratitude. Like, this beautiful thing is going to happen, and oh, it's going to be so great when it does. And I don't have to get caught up in, well, how's it going to happen? Because that's what life figures out. That's what the law of attraction does. But if I just sit there, then I'm not creating this lack, because lack is the slippery slope. Because when you start to go down that path, the more you want something, the more elusive it seems. And so you just, well, I got to try harder. I got to keep trying. I'm going to do more. And it never gets there. And usually what happens is we try so hard that we reach a breaking point. We reach that breaking point, and then we have this epiphany, because it's almost like that's our story of evolution. Like, we have to try so hard, and we're doing everything, even though we're pushing this thing away from us. And then we try so hard to the point where we evolve. We either have a breakdown or a breakthrough. And then from that, we come out of it new, and we have this fresh perspective. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't have to try that hard to do that. Like, it's just going to come to me because of all this work I've put in to get to this breaking point. Wow. But you do that enough and you realize, well, I'm not going to try. I'm not going to do hard. I'm not going to work myself hard. I'm just going to let these things come to me, because that's what life is meant to be. Life is meant to be enjoyable. Life is not meant to be this strain or struggle.
One thing in the book you talk about as well is this sort of attitude towards regret, and regret being like a bottomless jug. What is the attitude that we should have towards regret?
I think we need to let regret go. It's just a different way to learn a lesson. You know, every emotion is a degree of love, because that's what conditional love is. Unconditional love is everything underneath it, all these different conditions. And that's what hate is, just a violent form of love. Anger is just a violent form of love. Regret is just this melancholy form of love. And what do we really think of when we think of regret? What we really want to feel, Lewis, is the last moment we felt before regret happened. Like, we want to feel, that's what we're regretting. We had this really good feeling once, and it was so sweet because life was so good, and we didn't know how good life was. and then suddenly something happens and we regret. And we want to go back. We keep regretting because it's almost like we're taking ourselves right back to that point right before we felt regret. And there was this beautiful feeling we had. That's what we want to feel again. It's not the regret we feel. We want to feel that beautiful feeling again. And so we have to put it in context.
How can sorrow be a blessing if we understand it better?
What a great question. That's a beautiful question. And I like how it ties into the question of regret. The sorrow is the same thing. And what I mean by this, if we say that every emotion is a condition of a variation of love, then there's really two sides to that emotion, okay? There's a sorrow we feel, and that's the condition. But then there's an unconditional version of that, which is on the other side of that sorrow. So again, let's say my dad died 11 and a half years ago. And the day I found out he died, tremendous sorrow. I mean, just obviously really, really tremendous. When I think back to that, I can only get to this point, which is the sorrow that I feel. But what I'm trying to really get to is the other side of that sorrow, which is my dad's still alive. It'd have been so cool to say different things to him, but I'm so glad I got to say the things that I did. So we go back to that sorrow in a nostalgic sense. But again, like every other thing, every other emotion, what do we learn from that? We learn, life is really precious. And if the thing I said to my dad, the last thing I said wasn't, something I was particularly proud of or happy about, I want to make sure that I treat people more kindly moving forward so that everything I say to them, if it's the last thing I say, is a beautiful thing.
One of the things I resonated with most in the book was this idea of fear. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. The one of the things I resonated most in the book was this idea of fear and it holding us back. The example I'll give is, so I started this podcast when I was 20. I wanted to start it when I was 17. And it took me about 3 years to build up to do it, because at the time I was so scared of what my friends might say, what guests may say about my abilities. And it really was about 3 years worth of fear holding me back from launching it. And when I finally launched it, all the things I have now, I'm interviewing some of my heroes. I'm having some incredible conversations. I'm pretty sure my IQ has gone up, but just through these conversations alone. And I never thought of those things initially. All I thought was, the negative outcomes. How detrimental do you think that fear is in terms of holding us back and, us falling back into this comfort zone of complacency?
I think it's a great question, Lewis. And first, let me say, thank you for sharing that story, because I think it's incredible to hear the question. I mean, just this dialogue that we're having is fantastic. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. Fear is as good a teacher as you want it to be. So the more you feed fear, the more it's going to teach you. The problem with fear is it only teaches you the same lesson over and over again. And that lesson is, I will stop you every time from doing what you want to do, because that's what fear is. That's my job. So it becomes a question of, how much do I want to feed fear? How important is fear if I know it's going to tell me the same story over and over again? And it doesn't matter how fearful I am, it's the same story. It's the same story. You can't do it. These things are going to go wrong. What if this happens? What if that happens? It doesn't matter if it's starting a podcast or writing a book on why we exist. It's the same thing. I will, if you want to take class with me, fear, I will teach you every day. So it's like, well, you know what? After a long time of coming to your class, I think I'm going to drop out. I think I'm going to focus on something else for a while.
Are there any ways in which fear has held you back personally, maybe through writing or moving into fiction?
I think fear held me back for 20 or 30 years. I came, I got, when I was in school, I got published. I got honorable mention in a nationwide contest here in the US. I went into university thinking that I was going to be an English major, but knowing I was going to join the Marines because that's how I afforded school. And as soon as I joined the Marines, I pushed writing aside because I thought, you know what, Marines don't write because that's not part of their identity. And it took me about 10 years to kind of get over that. I'd flirted with writing again, a couple short stories, but it wasn't until I had a boss in the Marines who actually painted and had his paintings in his office. And I was blown away. I mean, this guy lived, was from Boston, Massachusetts, had been a police officer, so tough as nails, a street walking police officer. But he painted. And I remember being so blown away by this. And one of the first things I wrote was a poem about Achilles. And it was this beautiful journey for me because it was kind of like getting reacquainted with poetry and with writing. And I wrote the first stanza of the poem and I just couldn't find the voice. I couldn't find the voice for Achilles because I wanted it to be what he would say and what he would do. So I went away from it for about a week and a half and I came back to it and I just started writing and I wrote a page and a half and I looked at this thing and I remember, I think the last line is something like, though the fates are clearing their throats of my deeds, like what I've done will go down in history because I finally answered my hunger. And it was just powerful. And I was like, well, that's what Achilles would say. And it was kind of this beautiful discovery. And then it was like, well, why am I still in the Marines? Like, this is what I want to do. But that thought subsided because I had been in the Marines for 10 years. And so I had that identity. I'm like, well, I'm not going to figure this out. And so I stayed in the Marines for a few more years. I got out in 2006, took my first yoga class a week after I got out, became a yoga instructor a year later, read Napoleon Hill in 2017. And he asked me my life's purpose in Think and Grow Rich. And so from there, I wrote my first book about finding your purpose. I wrote The Lighthouse Keeper, obviously just now. And then I just finished the Book of David here. But yeah, so I think fear was tremendously successful in some ways, but also that was the journey that I had to take. And I couldn't have written The Lighthouse Keeper until I was ready to write it. I couldn't have written the Book of David until I was ready to write it. So yeah, fear is an excellent teacher, and we all have to sit in a classroom for a little while until we learn its lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I resonated so much with that. And another theme I resonated with was this idea of perfection. And again, I'll give the example. When we first started this podcast, we were interviewing our first guest, and we were talking to them about, we've got this website coming out. We're going to have a website for the podcast. And they said, well, why is it not out? And we said, well, we're working on, we want it to be better. And we kept making these changes and we'd draft it and we'd come up with new ways to change it. And we didn't publish the website. And it got to the point where we had to set ourselves a date and just say, look, forget perfection, just execute. And I think, we got our website up and then that opened more opportunities for us. And then it became this idea of forgetting perfection and just executing. How much do you think that, perfection is the enemy of progress, as you say?
I think it's when you start, I think it's a tremendous impediment, but I think it's achievable, but I think it can't be the initial goal. And I think what you just said with regards to your podcast is kind of the practice, right? Because what is perfection? And if you say, okay, let's take it in the terms of love, because we've talked about love as kind of a theme. I've certainly talked about it. So let's say, just for the sake of argument, there are 100 conditions of love. There are 100 different conditions of love, okay? But conditions have to be finite, because if you don't have finite conditions, what do you get? You get chaos, because otherwise it's completely, like there's no boundaries. So it's just, so one of those 100 conditions has to be unconditional perfection, because that's the basis for all the other conditions, right? There has to be a rudder. There has to be a rudder for conditional love to pivot off of. Otherwise, we get chaos. But you say, well, what's my version of conditional love? What's my version? What's my podcast look like? What's my book look like? And instead of saying, how can I make my book perfect? You say, what is the truth that I'm getting at here? What's the truth in your podcast? You're interviewing your heroes, but you're sharing messages of hope, of determination, of perseverance with an audience. And that becomes a gift. And so what you find is your condition starts to get closer and closer to the perfect variable, which is unconditional. And then you realize, I've created my perfect conditional version of a podcast, or I've created my version of love that ties back to what unconditional love is. That's how I get connected to the source. Oh my gosh, what a revelation. So it's not that we live in this place where anything goes, because there are boundaries. There have to be boundaries. That's because there's order to the universe. There's order to life.
How important do you think that making choices filled with risk are? Because I think for us personally, again, the risk maybe you took with your writing, or the risk that we initially took with pouring money into starting up this podcast before we'd even interviewed a person. And if you didn't make those choices that were filled with risk, then you'd never have reaped the reward.
It's a great call out. And I think risk is, depending on how informed you are, risk is just kind of a subtle form of fear. But the difference is you can inform yourself. And so the question then becomes, how much information do I need to mitigate or marginalize risk so that I can reasonably assume the outcome that I'm going to achieve or want to achieve is going to happen? And so part of that is, okay, what can I control? What can't I control? And when you start to assess that, then hopefully you can identify the things beyond your control and say, okay, I'm willing to accept this risk. These are the things I can't control, but I'm willing to accept this risk. It's when we don't do that homework and we kind of impulsively step into something where we haven't thought about it. We haven't thought about what's in our control, what's out of our control, where we kind of recklessly go in and then we create this chaos, or we create this confusion, and we're like, oh, I blew that up. And hopefully we learn the lesson from that, like, what I need to learn more so I can manage the risk a little bit better.
In the book, you mentioned that the quality of our lives depends on the quality of the questions we ask ourselves, which in turn lead to the quality of the answers. What are the types of quality questions we should be asking ourselves? And maybe more importantly, what are some of the questions that we should avoid asking ourselves?
Lewis, I love this question, and it brings to, I'll share with you something that I've come to realize, because everything I've ever written, for the most part, has been done on the computer. And when I wrote Being the Book of David, I hand wrote it. I started writing on the computer. I wrote one chapter, and then I realized that's not the book I'm writing. So I wrote it all by hand. And what I found was, we have surrendered the power of words to technology to a great extent, because the questions I would ask myself while writing this book were some of the most powerful questions I had ever asked myself. And it could be questions like, how do I become unlimited? How do I achieve absolute clarity? And you can't get an answer to a question you never ask. You have to ask the question. And the power of writing, what I've come to realize in writing this book is letters are the numbers of the alphabet. Words are equations. You put words together, you create power. That's what made Hitler powerful. That's what made Gandhi powerful. That's what makes people remember things, is the power of words strung together. So in that sense, a conversation is an equation. When you and I are having a conversation, you're trying to ask questions. If I'm trying to go off my own agenda and not answer your questions, neither one of us is solving the other's problem. But if I say, I want to be as attentive to this because Lewis asked for a copy of my book and he read it and his questions are thoughtful, I want to be as tuned in to what he's trying to accomplish as possible because this is your podcast. Now we're having a conversation, but we're solving one person's dilemma, and that's yours, because it's what am I going to do to make this podcast interesting? So if you think about a conversation, we always have conversations with ourselves all the time because we've got this little voice in our head. So the question becomes, what are you saying to yourself? Are you asking yourself, oh, why do I always do that? I screwed up again. How do I keep doing that? What you've just said to yourself is, tell me why I keep screwing up so I can do it more. That's the conversation that you just had in your head. Instead, if you say, how can I be more empowered today? How can I bring my best self to work or to life today? What is the highest version of myself that I can be today? And if you write that question down and then answer the question where you've written it, magic happens in your life. And it's just a little consistency. If you say, I'm going to take 10 minutes a day and journal first thing in the morning, because that's how I'm going to set myself up for success. And you build that day over day over day until the days become months and the months become years or whatever. After a while, I don't have to do that because I am the best version of myself. And now it's, how do I get better? I'm going to keep journaling because it's this rich, rewarding experience. And because everyone I come in contact with, I'm helping them. I'm not having my problem solved because a conversation is equation. I'm helping them solve theirs. And I get a benefit from that because I learned something by helping them learn something.
On that note, how important have you found the practice of journaling? We interview a lot of successful people, and they all attribute, journaling to a boost in their happiness. Is that something you found to be true?
I would say I wasn't a consistent journaler until I started writing Being. And now I realize whenever I want to have the most delicious and fulfilling conversation with myself, I journal, because it is truly a magical experience. And it's not even, even last night, I went upstairs, I opened the book that I've been journaling in, and I wrote down a question. I wrote down a question because I wanted the answer, and the answer started coming. And I was like, what a fascinating, I am going to journal the rest of my life. In fact, I don't know if I'll ever write another book on the computer, because writing this book, as mind-boggling as it's been, and starting, a month and a half ago with one version of the book and getting to a completely different place with the book in the span of 6 weeks, I never saw that coming, but I know it was because I was handwriting it. So I will journal for the rest of my life.
Now, in the conclusion to what I think is almost the Bible of mind mastery, I'll go as far as saying,
thank you.
You talk about meditation, and I think you do a fantastic job of tackling this stigma when it comes to meditation. I think that Sam represents a lot of young people, in the sense that, when they hear the word meditation, they automatically associate it with religion, they associate it with this iconography of, spiritual practicing, where it doesn't have to be that. It can just, at its simplest form, be sitting down and trying to concentrate on your breath. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. They see it as, as it's depicted in maybe Hollywood movies, for example. My question to you would be, what does meditation look like to you?
No, it's a great question. Oftentimes, in the simplest form, meditation is just coming back to self. And if we're out in a crowd, which obviously isn't happening a lot these days, but if we're in a work environment or with people, we're around their energy. I mean, it's just a fact. And we're all matter is energy vibrating a certain frequency. That's science. It's not religion. It's science. It's proven. So that energy has an effect on us. And if we, depending on the crowd, if we're not kind of aware, then we can slip into negative thoughts or negative patterns. So part of it may be, you know what? I'm just going to come back to myself for a second. I'm just going to breathe. I'm going to breathe for, inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for 7 seconds, exhale for 8 seconds. I'll do that 4 times. That's a good way to come back to self. When there's a more focused meditation, I like to use guided meditations. And the meditation I use right now is one where I do some breathing for a few minutes, just to kind of tune my body, if you will. I think about gratitude, 3 things I'm thankful for that have happened in my life, or may happen in my life in some cases. I cleanse my body. So I pull energy into my body to heal myself, to strengthen myself. I think of all the virtues that I want to enhance in my life, whether it's love, whether it's gratitude, whether it's determination, whether it's joy, whether it's compassion. And then I end it by thinking about 3 things that I want for the future. And again, I use the word want in quotes because I don't visualize getting to that point. I visualize being on the other side of that point. So it's already happened. And so I can look back on it and be like, oh my God, what a beautiful journey this has been. This has been so, I visualize whether it's standing on stage with Tony Robbins or being next to the love of my eternal life and we're about to get married or whatever. But I visualize that happening so that I don't create this sense of lack by saying, this is what I want to have happen. But doing that takes, 20 minutes. There's apps online that can guide people. And if you're new to meditation practice, then certainly starting at a few minutes at a time is probably the best way to start.
Fantastic. I think that's a perfect way to sort of round out the messages in the book if we, leave on meditation there. Before I dive into just a few questions that we ask every guest to end the interview. You mentioned earlier on in the conversation to remind you of something. Do you remember what that was that you wanted to talk about?
I do. Yeah. So it's fascinating. This is a fascinating time in history, right? And, this past weekend I was with friends and I read an early version of my newest book to them. And the light coming off Venus, the planet, was so brilliantly bright. And I realized that's kind of the Star of David, because David, the name means beloved, and Venus is the goddess of love. And so I thought, that's pretty cool. And then I realized as I was writing some of this book, I realized someone was writing with me. And there's a person that this 3rd book is written for, a specific person on the planet. Her name is Manon. And so I looked up what the name Manon means. And what I found, I don't know that I was successful in actually finding out the name, but what I found was there's a story or there's a show where Manon is like the creator of the universe. And I thought that's really interesting, because part of what I felt when I was writing the last version of the book was almost like you can start to see the power of spells in words and how they came about. And so because I said, you know what, I'm going to write this book and I'm going to read it to some friends, and I'll read it online live on May 17th. I was curious, is May 17th like a particular meaning on the Wiccan calendar? So I went to the 2020 Wiccan calendar, nothing for May 17th. June 1st of 2020 something interesting happens. There was an act in England that was established in 1563, I think. And it was an act forbidding the use of conjuring, enchantments, or spells from destroying or killing someone. And if you did that, it's punishable by death. So this is 1563. When does that law, Lewis, go into effect? According to the Wiccan calendar, that law goes into effect June 1st, 2020.
Wow.
So a law written almost 500 years ago goes into effect June 1st of this year, less than a month away. And I will, just from my own experience of writing this book, I will tell you part of my feeling is that law was planned because I was going to write my third book before and read it before June 1st of 2020.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's pretty crazy.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. That is beautiful.
Sure.
Now, to wrap up the interview, we just have a few questions we ask every guest, so they're non-specific. So the first one being, you've mentioned, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich.
Yep.
Are there, and your book is, is undoubtedly going to impact so many people's lives. Are there any books that have impacted your life?
Oh man, where to start? The first series I'm going to say is comic books, because comic books gave me they fed my imagination. They fueled my imagination, and to see comic books come on screen now to the extent that they have is fantastic. It's kind of a dream come true. Gosh, there have been so many books, but certainly Think and Grow Rich kind of stands at the mountain, just because of that one question: what is the purpose of your life? And that question has sent me on now a 3-year journey that has brought me to really being present. Oh man, I go back. I know this is going to be so, but Limitless, this book by Jim Quick that just came out, incredible book. And the guy is a superhero fan. Like, he talks about Marvel Comics and Stan Lee and being on this an X-Men movie. But Limitless is an incredible book. And what I would say to your audience and to you is every self-help book is a truth. And what I mean by that is every self-help book, the author at first is writing it for themselves more than anybody else. When I wrote The Lighthouse Keeper, I based Sam loosely on myself, but I wanted some distinction and separation. And it was only until this week, and I kind of had the sense over the last month or so as the book was getting close to launch, and I won't spoil for your audience how the book ends, but I realized at the end of the book, I am Sam. I am where he is. And what I'll share with you, the ending of my third book is, I am David Richards, I am the Lighthouse Keeper, and I am awake. And it's been a stunning thing. So what I say is, if you're interested in a good book, ask yourself, what kind of help do you need? What kind of help are you looking for in your life? And that's going to lead you down the path of the self-help books that you need. And when you know that the self-help book, at first and foremost, is written by the author for the author, then you know it's a truth. And so you're going to glean a truth from that. But it comes back to, what do you need in your life to make you feel whole, to make you feel fulfilled? Certainly for me, Think and Grow Rich was a cornerstone of that. But I mean, I've read The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is about the formation of the Federal Reserve and central banks this year. I've read, I read Limitless by Jim Quick. I've read a couple of, do you know Neville Goddard?
No, I don't believe I've heard of him.
So I think, I could be wrong, but I think he may have been, he was either British or American. But he wrote back in around the same time as Napoleon Hill. But he had a really interesting take on the Bible. And his take on the Bible was, don't look at the Bible as this book about this history of this ancient people or the story of Christ's remarkable life. Look at the Bible instead as a psychological drama playing out in your head. And so one of his books is called At Your Command, but he talks about the same things of, it's all law of attraction. And it's, feeling is a secret. You would attach a state of being is a thought combined with an emotion. And so feeling is really secret. But his take was so revolutionary because he says, when Moses comes down from the burning bush or from the mountain, what does he tell everyone? I am has sent me unto you. When Jesus is walking with his disciples to temple to pray, he asks, who do men say that I am? And he's not saying, who do men say that I, Jesus, am? He's saying, who do men say that I am? So in other words, who you say you are, it goes back to this idea of this powerful manifestation. If I say I am a genius, what a powerful reinforcing message I'm telling my mind, I'm telling my body. If I say I am an idiot, it's not a great message. Like that's not a message that I want to repeat often. So I really liked Neville Goddard's work. That's a good way of saying it. And then, just from a business kind of standpoint, I jumped into a bunch of Robert Kiyosaki books. So he's incredibly successful as a real estate investor, but he's written a handful of books under the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series where he shares his experiences.
Amazing. We're big fans of Robert Kiyosaki as well. So
okay, nice.
Are there any societal rules or societal norms that you love to break?
Oh man, are there any? I do occasionally like to smoke or ingest things that are not legal across the entire United States, but some of our states are a little more progressive and a little more advanced. So when I'm in those states, if I can indulge, then that's something I'd like to do.
The last question I have for you is a scenario. So if every person on the planet was tuned into the same frequency, and I said to you, David, you have the chance to broadcast one message, one lesson, and every person on the planet is going to hear that lesson, what would David Richards' message to the world be?
I love this question. My message to the world would be to be unconditional in your own special, beautifully perfect and perfect way, and just love. Because we are so early in the stages of eternity. One day, far, far in the future, we are going to create a being called love, and that will be our home. We're going to live in this beautiful being called love, and all it takes is just being receptive to the message. And it's not about being like someone else, it's being your true self. And my book Being, if you listen to it on May 17th, or even if you hear about it, you're going to want to read the book, because it's not about me helping you. It's about you helping yourself.
David, where can our listeners engage with you, connect with you, buy the book, and find you online anyway?
Absolutely. DavidRichardsAuthor.com. I'm on Instagram, David Richards Author. I think it's on Twitter the same way, although sometimes when I log in, it's David Richards A2. But you can email me at david@davidrichardsauthor.com. Happy to hear anything from you. The book is available worldwide, although I know with the pandemic going on, it hasn't been a focus to push books out. But I think as we're getting close back to normal and things are normalizing, you can certainly buy the book on Amazon, buy it from the website, but that just directs you back to Amazon.
Perfect. David, I'll be listening on May 17th. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been fantastic. And I'd love to have you on for part 2 sometime in the near future, maybe when the next book is out.
Lewis, I would love it. You are incredible talent such great questions. So thank you for honoring me with the chance to share with your audience and share with you. My expectation is Being is going to come out very soon. I would love to be back on your show when it does.
Perfect. Can't wait for that, David. Have a brilliant day, and I'll connect with you again soon.
Lewis, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.